So as you can see here, Trapcode Particular can be used to make some really amazing looking design elements, such as this one that's traditionally called the 4D Fractal. This is done using a layer emitter and taking advantage of turbulence fields to create this sort of folding effect. That's what we're going to do right now. So I'll create a new comp for my 4D Fractal and create a new layer for Particular. Now, like I said, I'm going to need a layer to emit from. So I'm just going to copy this and paste this one into my composition. This is just a simple circle effect that I've done. I've animated the radius so that it animates out like that. Take a look at the settings here. I've got the thickness setting here, and I've feathered the inside of it just a little bit to give that feathering on there. Also, on top of it, I've added a 4-color gradient and chosen some colors that are fairly similar, but just give a little bit of color variation from a red to pink to sort of a reddish orange. So what we're going to do is use this composition here to emit our particles. So I'm going to rotate this into place and put it right about there. And I'm going to turn the visibility of that layer off and turn on our particular layer. So on our solid here, I'll apply Trapcode Particular, and I'll go to the emitter section and set the emitter type to layer grid. So this will allow me to emit particles from a specific layer in a grid formation. I need to select the layer that I'm going to use, so I'll use this emitter comp. So if I scrub through this won't be too impressive just yet. We do not have nearly enough particles in here to create that fractal shape that you saw. Now, we're not going to do this by increasing the particles per second, but because we're using a layer grid, we need to increase the number of particles we have in the grid. So if I go up to the options and set my grid emitter to, I'm going to use 650 in X and use 550 in Y. So we're making a lot of particles here by increasing the number in the grid count. It's going to take a lot longer to render, but now we can see we're sort of filling in and matching the shape of the emitter composition. So if I turn that off and turn this on, you can see they're sort of following each other because it's taking the RGB color of the emitter and assigning that to the color of the particle. And we can see the subtle variation that it made in the color in the original composition. So now I'm going to add a little bit of upward motion to these particles. I'll go into the physics section here under air and add a little bit of wind. So I set this to a negative direction, and the particles are going to slowly rise upward over time. Now where it gets interesting is where we add that spatial distortion in there. First, let's turn on the size of our particles, because these are a little bit big right now. I'm going to set this to 1. I'm also going to set the velocity of the particles to 0. We don't want them moving. So they'll just be right in place, and they're more or less following that emitter composition almost verbatim. So now if we go into the physics section and twirl open this thing called the turbulence field, what we can do is shift the particles around in space using what it calls this turbulence field. It's really just kind of a distortion field that can affect either the size or position, as you can see here. I'll bring that full screen. We can have this turbulence affect the size of the particles or the position of the particles. If I turn this up and have the particles' position affected by this turbulence, we can see sort of this turbulent shape taking place here. Also, if I set the size to be affected by this, we'll have some variations in the particle size, and it kind of starts adding a nice little effect there. The color of the particles is being dictated by the emitter, but I'm going to set the transfer mode to add. Right now there's no interactions of one particle to the other where they overlap. It's set to a normal transfer mode, so I'll set this to add. And now we get some nice particle color interactions like that. So let's do a quick render of this. So this is a very cool setting, and I've used this in the past for things like smoke and fire. If I go into this composition here, turn off that color and just leave this white and have the particles absorb that white color, and then go into my settings here, I'll turn the particle opacity down. And we can start getting sort of a smoky kind of look. This is going to be very useful and look really cool. I think this is a very amazing looking setting with Trapcode Particular.